Hello and welcome back to the Opposites Abroad podcast, the podcast that covers all things travel. Charlie Bosco here, as ever, joined by my great friend Traveller Tattooed, TT, down in Denver. And today we are talking about Hollywood. We would like to cover Greater LA at some stage, but that's probably needs to be an entire podcast season. It's an enormous city. So we're focusing today on probably its most famous neighborhood. Couple of quick facts. Los Angeles cities has a population of 3.8 million. Greater LA is 18.3 million, and that makes it the second largest city in the country after New York. Hollywood, the neighborhood we'll be focusing on, is actually only officially 3.5 square miles with 78,000 residents. That is a fact not many people know, TT. Hollywood is 3.5 square miles. Who knew for the most famous postcode in America?
Well, and I always get mixed up because there's Hollywood and then there's North Hollywood. There's a Hollywood Hills. Beverly Hills is right next to it. Like, it all just kind of merges together, and it's hard to keep track of sometimes.
Yeah, and it's a city you know well. Hey, I guess you've lost track of how many times you've been to LA and Hollywood.
I feel like I know it pretty well. LA is just so massive. There's so much to do there because you've got, and it kind of depends on like what you consider LA, because LA proper isn't Hollywood. But if you say, the LA and the surrounding areas, you've got everything from Hollywood, you've got Disneyland, you've got beaches. It's just a massive, massive area with a ton of people and a ton of things to do. So I have a decent sense of LA, and I've been to Hollywood, I'd say probably maybe half a dozen times.
Yeah, I have to say, it's not the biggest city in the world. Tokyo apparently is officially the biggest city in the world. But after our trip together in Hollywood, I stayed on to work and hiked up with a colleague of mine to the Hollywood sign. It's actually quite a long hike. It's not busy by any means because it's quite a long way from where you can park. And LA just goes as far as you can see. It blew my mind. You look north into Glendale and then you can see Pasadena and San Bernardino, and you can see it kind of disappearing into the horizon, and Huntington Beach and Orange County, and it feels so vast, Los Angeles. It feels like the biggest city I've ever been to, even if Wikipedia says it's not.
It is. It's massive, and nobody really goes to downtown LA. There's really not a ton to do down there. It's pretty sketchy. But the other thing with LA, there's that song by Missing Persons. Everybody walks in LA, or nobody walks in LA, because there's no real infrastructure for trains and buses, and it's really terrible. So for a big city, you're pretty much stuck driving, and so traffic is just absolutely horrible everywhere. So I always recommend, if someone does go to LA, to try to kind of stay in a spot or drive around during the middle of the day, and don't try to be driving places in the morning or the evenings, because you just never get anywhere.
Yeah, the traffic was all I'd heard it to be. We stayed in an area called West Athens. Wasn't the best area. It's not a million miles from Compton, kind of South LA. It wasn't a great neighborhood, and I wanted to go to the Griffith Observatory.
Yes. And
the Hollywood sign. And I look on the map, and it's 10 miles, 15 miles. And Google said it'll take 48 minutes. And I was thinking, oh, come on. No way. It literally took 48 minutes. We're crawling in second gear, just in the middle of the day on a Thursday. The traffic is insane there, isn't it?
Yeah, it takes forever. And if you're going to LA for, let's say you're going to go for a concert, and you're going to blaze in for a couple days to go to a concert, get a hotel as close as humanly possible to the concert, and stay right there. Because if you're not familiar with it, you'll say, oh, if you look at, compared to like Denver, where you could stay on one side of Denver and then go to a concert on the other side of Denver, LA's not like that. It's going to be an absolute nightmare trying to get anywhere.
But the good news is that each area of LA is like a city of its own. So Venice Beach feels very much like its own place. You could go and stay in Venice for a few days and just really enjoy that, and you don't need to go and explore.
Yeah, and there's different food, different places. It's like a bunch of little cities or towns all merged together, and there's not like a lot of big cities that are like that.
And you touched on it already. You generally travel to LA by flying to LAX, and that is as busy and as much for pain to negotiate as you imagine it would be. And it's also not super well located for a lot of the city, hey, particularly Hollywood, which we're talking about today, isn't super near LA. Are there any airports further north you could fly to get to Hollywood?
Yeah, there's little airports kind of spread throughout, and I know I've flown into a couple of them for different reasons. But but then it's difficult because they don't have a lot of times they don't have good, rental car companies, or there's really not a ton of flights. There might be one flight into a little airport around there, and LAX is just always the cheapest and easiest. And then all the big international flights all go out of LAX. So if you're going to spend a couple days, because another way that I recommend doing LA is if you're flying anywhere from the West Coast internationally, is book the tickets separately and then go to LA for a couple days and then go to the airport and fly out to wherever you're going, Tahiti, Hawaii, wherever it is. And you can spend a couple days, and in those couple days you could go to the beach, you could go to Disneyland, you could go to Hollywood. I even did a few days one time where I just did culinary restaurants in downtown LA, and I just flew in for a few days and did that. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do, but that's a really good way to see LA instead of doing a trip just to go, is do it in conjunction with a longer trip.
Yeah, there are a lot of cities where you can kind of have the experience, and you can, I hate the phrase, but you can tick the whole city off. Like London, if you go to London for 3 or 4 days, you'll probably see, you won't go to every museum, and you could spend your life in London and be finding new stuff to do, but you can see the kind of top 10 stuff in 3 or 4 days. And LA, just because of the traffic and the sheer scale of it, it's really awkward to try and do that. You would spend a lot of time in traffic. So, yeah, I think first point we should make is just take a part of LA and stay there for a few days and come back another time and do the next bit. And the bit we're talking about today is Hollywood, and we met there in February 2020. We had no idea. It was towards the end of February as well. We had no idea what was coming down the barrel at us in the form of COVID a few weeks later. Pretty crazy to think. I remember being on the plane and talking to my colleagues, and they were saying, yeah, this COVID thing, I think it's going to mean we don't go to China this year. And in my old job, I had to go to China 2 or 3 times a year, and everyone was going, well, with this COVID thing, we probably won't be going to China. And we didn't always work in the best parts of China, so people weren't super sad about not having to go. And it's just crazy to think that I think it was 2 weeks later, I was back in Europe, locked down, and it was kind of the final trip before COVID really hit. But it was a fun trip. We were there a couple of days, and we stayed in a pretty second-rate motel.
We
at
did.
the end of Sunset Strip.
The other thing about LA, like a lot of big cities, is the hotels are just unbelievably expensive.
Yeah.
And Hollywood, because it's not a big area, there's not a ton of hotels, and there's a couple super, super expensive hotels, and then more normal kind of like I call like bro hotels that you and I would probably stay in and do our hanging out and drinking beer. There's really not a ton of options. No,
and I remember it struck me how small that kind of famous area is. And yeah, you aren't spoilt for choice for places to stay in Hollywood. You are definitely spoilt for choices for places to go out. One place I'd always wanted to go, it was the first place we went. You picked me up from LAX. I don't know if you remember this. And we went to the Rainbow Bar and Grill.
Yes.
On Sunset Strip, because I like Motorhead, the band.
Yes.
And Lemmy, the front man from Motorhead, used to essentially live there. His apartment was a couple of blocks away. He used to get his mail delivered to the Rainbow Bar and Grill. That's when you know you're a pretty avid bar goer, when you get your mail delivered there. And anyone who's ever been famous and been in the movie or music industry has drunk at the Rainbow Bar and Grill. and that was the first place we went for a beer, and that was super fun.
Including us. Well, and yeah, the history of music in LA is unbelievable, but the history of the Sunset Strip and all those bands in the late 70s and early 80s, all the hair metal bands, there's just crazy concerts there, and so many bands came from that area. The Go-Go's were from there, or played there all the time. Devos, they still have their kind of headquarters building in Hollywood where they do all their soundtracks for movies and things. And there's just, if you read any autobiography from any of those musicians, from Motley Crue or
Guns N' Roses, just off Sunset Strip.
Any of those bands, half their stories are about the Sunset Strip. So it's really cool just walking it and thinking all the history. You've got River Phoenix died right in that area when he ran out in the street, and his brother came out and found him. I mean, there's so much crazy things that have happened there. And
a bit like London and DC, when you're in Hollywood, you do feel like you're in the middle of something, don't you?
You do. And it's funny because people always ask, and I'm sure they ask you all the time, like, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live? And one of the things I always say is, well, how much money do I have in this scenario? And if
and that is a key factor in LA.
It is, because it's so expensive. And to be honest, if I had a ton of money, no family obligations, and no work obligations, I would look very hard at living in the Hollywood Hills. There's so much history there. There's so many, like you said, the views over LA are just incredible, and there's just you never run out of things to do. And I'm probably a little ADD. I can't sit still. That's why I'm always traveling and doing stuff. So for me, being in the mix of all this history and all there's just tons of things. You're never going to be bored there. And then in Hollywood Hills, you're still kind of secluded. You have your own little compound up there where you can have your space. There, everything's all walled in those houses up there, and I think that'd be such a fun place to live. Now, maybe at my age, getting a little bit older, it wouldn't be as fun as it was when I was in my 20s, but I still think it'd be really fun.
I'm surprised to hear you say that, because I don't think I've ever been anywhere that was more different to my expectations than Hollywood. Because even the name evokes luxury.
Oh yeah, it's not at all.
And money. And you walk down Sunset Strip. I mean, we walk past the Chinese theater where they have the Oscars, and we walk past is it Kimmel who films his show on Sunset Strip opposite, or Jimmy Fallon, one of the talk
them,
shows.
Yeah. Somewhere in New York, somewhere there.
Yeah, and it's pretty rough. And even around Rainbow Bar and Grill and Whiskey A Go Go and all the famous bars, it's a pretty sketchy neighborhood.
It is.
You think this is supposed to be the Monaco of North America, the luxury place where the rich and famous live and dreams come true, and it's a pretty sketchy neighborhood, Hollywood.
It is, and Beverly Hills is that way. I mean, you go not very far from there, and Beverly Hills is gorgeous and has all the luxury stores, and the streets are just beautiful. And but Hollywood. And it's actually a lot better than it used to. So the first time I went to actual Hollywood was about 25 years ago. And I went to go to a convention. And I took a cab, because this is way before Ubers. I took a cab from LAX to the convention. And I told the cab driver, I've always wanted to go to Hollywood. I've always heard about it. I really want to go. And he was like, oh my God, you do not want to go to Hollywood. He was like, it is horrible. It is full of homeless people. It is super dangerous. You're gonna get robbed if you walk around. And he goes, you know what? I'll just take you there for free, so you can kind of see it. So we drove out from our normal path, and he turned off the meter and parked in front of the Chinese Man Theater, which is a famous theater where everyone does their hands in the cement. And there's been, in the golden age of Hollywood, was all the premieres and stuff, and it was awful. And there was there was no tourists really. There's nobody walking around. It was just, like he said, just super sketchy people. And I got out and walked around the block a little bit and got in and then went to the convention. And it's a lot different now. Now when you go, there's tourists everywhere. It's still dirty and sketchy, but it's almost a little like New Orleans-ish, I feel like, for what it is. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a great place to take like a bunch of little kids with you if you have little kids. I don't think there's that much they'll see in actual Hollywood, and it's just, you're going to have to be watching them every second. You've got some creepy guy dressed as a dirty Elmo trying to get people to take pictures with them. It's just, I don't know, the whole place gives off bad vibes.
Yeah, like you say, we went to Beverly Hills and Bel Air, and that is what I always imagined Hollywood would be like. But Hollywood itself is definitely not like you see it on the movies. It's not the best area of LA by any means. Bel Air and Beverly Hills were super interesting. I know we're slightly deviating from Hollywood, but one thing I really noticed there was nobody walked. So you're driving up the streets. We drove up, is it Mulholland Drive, the really famous residential street?
Yes, which is a great movie named after that too, by David Lynch.
We drove up and there was these insane houses, the kind of houses you expect to see in Beverly Hills, and nobody was on the sidewalks.
Yeah.
Nobody walked anywhere. The only people we saw was Mexican guys tending the grass.
Yeah.
And it was all Mexicans just working on these lawns and sculpting hedges, and I didn't see a single person that looked like they were just walking from their house to somewhere else.
Yeah, I think they roll in their mansions and their expensive cars and roll out.
Pretty much, yeah. Which in Hollywood I could understand, because it's definitely a bit sketchy. It's the first place Hollywood's the first place I've ever seen someone literally smoking crack, just sitting there. I'd never actually seen it in the flesh. What a sheltered life I've lived. I was living in Europe at the time.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we have those problems.
Hey, we got them here in Canada as well. But you have some tattoos from Hollywood, don't you? Because you're famous. Can we call you famous? You're famous, right?
I prefer infamous.
Infamous, yeah. For your tattoos. You got a couple in Hollywood, didn't you, from Kat Von D, who at the time was super famous.
Yeah, I do. I have 2 from her. I super lucked out with that. At the time, she was at the peak of her popularity. She had her TV show. Massive lines. You couldn't get, I mean, there's no way to get an appointment with her. And what I did was I started thinking if there was something she might want to do, and I submitted an idea for a tattoo on her online portal. And amazingly enough, like 2 weeks later, I get an email from her sister, who was her assistant at the time, saying that she wanted to do it. And I flew in, got the tattoo. She was super nice, great experience. And I asked her sister, I said, how many requests do you get a day for tattoos from? Does she get a day to get to tattoo? Because she really only tattooed maybe 1 or 2 people a day. And actually, when I was there the day before me, she had tattooed Dave Navarro from Jane's Addiction. Then she tattooed me. Right around that time, she tattooed Lady Gaga, before Lady Gaga got really famous. And so I said, how many requests is she getting a day? And her sister said 10,000.
10,000.
10,000. And somehow I just lucked into where I had picked this old painting, basically, and she had always wanted to do it. So when her sister saw it come in and was weeding through them all, she showed it and she said, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then for the second one, I developed I wouldn't say like a friendship with her sister, but we got along, and we'd actually email occasionally after that, because this is before social media. So we'd email about movies and stuff a little bit. And then I said, well, I'd really like to come back. And she got me in again for another tattoo. And actually went with a buddy for that one, and while we were getting tattooed, or while I was getting tattooed, I was just chatting with her, and she's just like the nicest lady, and she was telling me all about how hard it was being famous, and she couldn't go to the grocery store, and she had to get everything ordered in. I said, hey, I heard you got like a really cool house up in the Hollywood Hills. And she goes, yeah, do you want to see it after the tattoo? And I was so
Yes.
I was so shocked. I was like, yeah, of course I do. So I get so I tell my buddy, because he's sitting there when she like went to do something. I said, hey, we're gonna go to her house after this, and he was like shocked. So we got into her. We went in after the tattoo. We got into her Cadillac, and that was all customized in black, and drove out of the back of the tattoo studio, and there was paparazzi outside, and they were taking a million pictures when we were driving out, and I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna be in like Us Weekly or something. Like, who is this guy? She drove us around the block to our rental car, and then we followed her up to her house while she drove like an absolute maniac, either to throw us off so we could ever find it again, or because she just how she was. But we followed her to her house, and her house at the time was just awesome. It's since burned down, but it was built in the 1920s by one of like the set designers that had done a lot of the stuff for like Frankenstein and Dracula and some of the Universal monsters. So it looked like a little castle, and it had murals inside that looked like castles. It had grounds that looked like castle grounds, but it really wasn't that big of a house. I think it was only one bedroom, and then it had a basement, and the basement had a curly stair that went down with a big mural of like a castle countryside on it. And we just hung out with her for a little bit. She kind of gave us a tour and sent us on our way, and it was just like the most surreal experience ever, being in her house. She was so gracious, so nice. Yeah, it was just I still look back at that as one of my fondest kind of travel memories or unexpected memories that's ever happened. And I've got 2 tattoos by her that I just love. They still look great. Her sister stopped being her assistant after that, and I lost my connection. So I tried to go back a 3rd time, and I could never get a hold of anybody. Once her sister was gone, that was it. So, but it's fine. I really lucked out getting those two tattoos from her.
Because at the time she was it LA Inc., the show she was doing, and it was a huge reality show, wasn't it?
Massive, absolutely massive. So yeah, she was on LA Inc., yeah.
This was before streaming, wasn't it? So there were less shows to watch.
Yes, and
so more people saw each show.
And the second time I was there, the time I went to her house, they were actually filming the show that day, and I had to sign a big release because I could be in the show. And
did you end up being on it?
You can see there's an episode where you can see my arm in the back of my head. So yes, I guess technically I am in a show.
We're really scraping the barrel for being famous here, aren't we?
I know.
The back of your arm is on.
Back of my arm
on
is
LA
on it.
Inc.
But it was so interesting watching him shoot the show, because they did multiple takes. They had little powwows before every scene. They had, you saw, like, when you watch the show, you'd see people in the lobby like looking through like books of like tattoo flash. Well, those are actors. They just sat there all day long doing that. The doors were locked, like you couldn't get in. There's a big crowd outside, like, and it was cool, but it's kind of one of those things that's like, it kind of ruined reality TV for me, because you always know it's kind of fake, but you always kind of hope, like, well, most of it's probably real. And then you're there and you're like, oh, this is completely scripted. This is completely, there's actors in here that are playing other stuff, and it was a very, very cool day for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. But those shows generally are far too perfect to be real. Hey, my sister went along to one of the, I don't know, Britain's Got Talent or X Factor, or whatever those shows are where they find a good singer, with Simon Cowell.
Yeah.
Who's made a few bucks from reality TV, so hats off to Simon Cowell, much as it's not to my taste. But she said the same thing, where one of the judges would think of something witty to have said at the moment, so they go back and they capture them saying as if it's live, and they drop it into the edit so it looks like you get this amazing singer, and all the judges say something really insightful and witty just at the right moment, but actually it was all just picked up afterwards when they thought of something good to say.
Well, and I tell you, the good thing about that experience, and we can kind of get back to Hollywood, is that she really was like an unbelievable nice lady.
Yeah.
Like, she was gracious and sweet and kind and generous with her time, and I would ask her all kinds of questions about what's it like being famous, what's it like, and she just answered everything and wasn't cautious about what she would talk about, and talked about some relationship stuff, and she was just I just thought the world of her, and just it was a great trip, and it was nice meeting someone who's tattooed me that I have fond memories of, and not like, oh man, every time I look, I just remember what a jerk that person was.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great story. I'm glad we went off on a bit of a tattoo tangent. I mean, as I say, you are infamous. You are Traveler Tattooed.
Well, and there's a style of tattoos from LA, which is the fine line tattoos of black and gray that is more portrait style. And I always tell people when they say, I want to get a portrait of my grandmother, I want to get a portrait of this person, what do I do, or who should I go to? I always say, go to LA, especially go to like around Hollywood, get someone that specializes in it, because one little thing wrong, like something wrong with their eye, will make it look like a totally different person. And it is a style out there that they are really, really good at. And she's one of the best. And
it'll bug you forever, I'm guessing.
It would bug you forever. Yeah. It's like, I can tell it's supposed to be Elvis because of his hair, but it doesn't really look like Elvis. Yeah, like, if you're going to get a portrait, you want it done right. And it's worth spending the money and going to LA and getting it done right. Yeah,
100%. If someone who knew the person has to ask who it is, you probably didn't get it done well enough, I'm guessing. Maybe that's the benchmark.
I would guess that's right, too.
So, were people to visit Hollywood, they can't get tattooed by Kat Von D unless they get super lucky. Actually, I think she stopped doing it anyway, hey, but...
yeah, I think she's moved to Iowa or somewhere, but...
So that's not on the table for most people, but what are the things that you would recommend people to do in Hollywood? One thing I remember, we went to the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. That was super interesting.
Yes. So I learned that with having when I had small children, is cemeteries and monuments and playgrounds are great time killers, and they don't cost anything. So there's some really cool, unbelievably cool people buried in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. There's Rudolph Valentino, who had one of the biggest funerals of all time when he died. They have, I think, two of the Ramones. Just, you can Google it online and then walk around trying to find these grave sites, and a lot of the sites are really, really, the gravestones are really cool and really ornate for some of these celebrities. I think Vampira is buried there. It's an awesome, and it's not this gigantic cemetery. It's actually a kind of small cemetery, but it's just jam packed with famous people.
Yeah, and I remember seeing a kind of mausoleum, almost like a walk-in tomb. But I think you've got to have a lot of money to get a tomb in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery.
I think so too.
Two I remember, there was Chris Cornell from Soundgarden.
Yeah.
And Chester Bennington from Linkin Park.
I actually saw Soundgarden when he was alive in concert.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never seen him. I would love to have done.
Well, you got close to him at least there.
Well, sadly, yeah. But growing up as a little rocker in the north of England, I was into Soundgarden at Linkin Park. But the crazy thing about that cemetery is when you walk around it, we weren't looking for anyone. And you just go, oh, check it out. It's Chris Cornell or this guy. It's amazing in that respect. So Hollywood Forever Cemetery, free, super fun.
Yes, the Walk of Fame, of course, is another thing. You just walk around for free and look at all the stars. And
everyone who had a star had to have been there, right? So you are kneeling in the same position that whoever it was knelt there to put their hands in the cement.
Yeah, this Hollywood it's a weird thing because you're like voted in by a committee, but you have to pay for your own star. So there's some people there that have stars. You're like, how does this person have a star? And then there's really
there were
famous.
a few weak links.
Yeah, there's some really famous people who don't have stars. It's a strange thing, but it's really interesting walking around and looking at it. And a lot of them are very old movie stars that you might have to Google or even or more like our parents' generation. But that's the beauty of Hollywood. It's just a lot of history there.
I was surprised how many of the stars were to people I hadn't heard of. And then, as you say, a lot of famous people don't have one. Al Pacino does not have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Oh,
One of the most famous actors in America. So that's worth doing, isn't it? And just walking up and down Sunset Strip. We've said it's a bit sketchy. If you stick in kind of the main area around the Chinese Theatre within a couple of blocks of there, it's not too bad at all. But you don't have to go far before it becomes quite unpleasant. And I remember we went to a famous establishment called Jumbo's Clown Room.
Yes.
People
so
you can Google it.
So there's Jumbo's Clown Room is probably in my top 3 favorite bars that I've ever been to, especially United States. I would say it's the Golden Tiki in Las Vegas, the Dungeon in New Orleans, and Jumbo's Clown Room in Hollywood. And Jumbo's Clown Room, it's been there for decades. People think it's a strip club, but it's not a strip club. There's no nudity in it. It's more like a go-go bar, I guess I would call it, where there's girls dancing, but they're not nude. And then it's very small. It's very old inside. There's always a big line outside. It's really interesting people inside drinking, and it's just really good music. It's a super, super fun place. And just the name Jumbo's Clown Room is ridiculous. And it's been there for many, many, many years. Decades, unchanged.
And that's at the eastern end of Sunset Strip, hey, and it's not the best area around it.
No, it's just in his little strip club. Or or not strip club, it's in a little strip mall.
Yeah, but I remember walking out and it was pretty sketchy. There was some pretty sketchy people inside. It was an amazing place.
Yeah, it was fun. It makes me want to go back, actually, just talking about it.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Because I've been there 2 or 3 times, and it's such a fun place.
Yeah. So we checked out Rainbow Bar and Grill, Whiskey A Go Go. Food-wise, in Hollywood, what are your recommendations?
I would recommend don't be a vegetarian.
I was in a vegetarian phase at the time.
You were, and it was super irritating because because a lot of those restaurants are like old school steakhouses. They're old. They're kind of the places where the waiters still wear tuxedos. I mean, even though, we say like the streets are kind of dirty and stuff. And I would say kind of when I talk about like it's similar to New Orleans, if you've ever been there, like New Orleans can be kind of sketchy out on the side, and then you walk in and it's really nice inside the buildings or inside the restaurants. I'd say Hollywood's similar. So you go into a restaurant that's been there since the 50s. The waiters have worked there forever, and it's really nice. But it was tough because I remember us walking around looking at different menus, trying to find stuff you could eat, and we did okay. But it's not those really old restaurants aren't always great places that have dietary restrictions. They don't really get it.
No, but I mean, I love the ones we went into with the leather booths.
The leather booths, it's a great place to get cocktails. You go get a martini. Hollywood royalty ate at all those places in the 50s and 60s. So there's so much history in those places. In the area is a lot of other cool stuff that I would recommend too. That's really, if not right in Hollywood proper, is right next to Hollywood. One is the La Brea Tar Pits that you can walk out and look at them for free, and it's a great place if you have kids because it's educational. There's a little museum, but they're the tar pits that mastodons and animals from that era fell into and got stuck. And when you think of like a mastodon in an old painting in a tar pit trying to get out, that's where it's from. So you can go tour it. There's bones. There's still the tar pits there that are bubbling away you can look at, and they pulled just massive amounts of bones out of that thing. So that's a really cool thing. There's a farmer's market over there that is one of the oldest ones I've been to, that is just awesome, and it's got all these little tiny restaurants in it. It's very historic. It's very calm. It's clean inside. I would always recommend doing that. And then around there too, you've also got Griffith Observatory by the Hollywood sign. And if you didn't know, the Hollywood sign used to say Hollywood Land. And when Hollywood is really at its like absolute worst, and because it really fell into horrible disrepair after the golden age of Hollywood, and then it was kind of been revitalized now. But the Hollywood sign, you can Google it, was just falling apart, and the Hollywood Land, the land part basically fell off, and that's why we see the Hollywood sign now. That's been rejuvenated, but it's worth the Google of when it used to say Hollywood Land. And Griffith Observatory is up there, which is if you watched Rebel Without a Cause, that's where James Dean gets killed at the end. Sorry, I ruined it if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, there's the plot twist on.
But he runs out and he gets killed in front of it, so that's cool. One thing I would say that is really cool about Hollywood is that there's a lot of stuff to see that doesn't cost any money. You can go see the La Brea Tar Pits, you can go to the Griffith Observatory, you can go to the cemetery, you can walk down the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And there's really not a lot of places like that have such cool, iconic things that are such a slice of Americana that you really don't have to pay for. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah. So it's a thumbs up for a visit to Hollywood. For me personally, don't have any great itch to spend a ton of time there. I'm glad I saw it. It was really interesting. I think everyone should go once and wander around. But it's the fact there's two things that I kind of struggled with. The first one was that you walk one block and you're somewhere you really shouldn't be, having been in a nice area. It's amazing how quickly it goes from good to bad. And then, so that was slightly nerve-wracking because I didn't know. So you suddenly go, oh, we've walked a block we shouldn't have walked. Let's go back. And then the other thing was just the sheer scale of LA was just overwhelming to a country boy like me. So super glad I've seen it. I'm sure I'll go back. I'd like to go back with you.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
You're a great local guide. But I was kind of overwhelmed by Hollywood. And so for me, it was an experience rather than somewhere that I'd be rushing back to. But super glad I've been. I mean, yeah, it's an amazing place to experience.
Well, and you love American history, and I wouldn't compare that to like going to like Boston or Philadelphia or somewhere, but Hollywood is such a huge slice of Americana, and everywhere in the world knows that America makes great movies and has for decades, and we generally America has the biggest movie stars and the biggest budgets and just these crazy famous movies. And while you're in Hollywood, you can see a big slice of that. You can see where people ate. You can tour Universal Studios. You can tour Warner Brothers. You can tour these studios where they filmed things and see the sets and see where Back to the Future was. You can see the Psycho House. You can see all this just amazing things that you don't get that anywhere else in the world. There's not other places that I'm aware of in the world that are just so focused on movie making with so many decades of history, and it really is an amazing place. And it is.
I agree.
And it is, like you said, it's somewhere everybody should see. I think if you're touring America or you're interested in America, there's places that you can't really feel like you've seen everything in America ever, but without seeing certain things like the Grand Canyon, the Statue of Liberty. And I think Hollywood's right up there with that stuff.
I agree. Yeah, I'm so glad I went, and I would like to go again.
We can have a steak this time.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. But it defied my expectations more than anywhere else I've been, and it was slightly overwhelming. Was my experience of LA, but I would like to go back, and there's still a ton of stuff I haven't done there around Hollywood. So let's go back.
Yes, let's go back. That would be super fun.
But in the meantime, we will speak next week, our first recording of 2025. Happy New Year in advance.
Yes, Happy New Year.
Speak next time.